Hi, King Dan here. This video is called Jamal vs. Lourdes, Office of Inspector General. Before we begin, I wanted to look at some of the clauses in the Constitution that provided a framework and the underlying principles that were expected in the Jamal vs. Lourdes case. So the first one is, I'm only going to read the red. Feel free to pause the video just to read it fully. But the basic premise is under the authority of the king, the office of Inspector General is formed. This office will carry out the function of investigating and bringing prosecutions against any individual working in the governments of Chung-o-guk. This office is given to Moon Kuk-jin and his heirs. And the second clause, I'll read fully. It says, the president and the executive branch are prohibited from carrying out clandestine acts of terror against the citizens of the United States of Chung-o-guk with the intent on molding public opinion, false flag operations. Any suspicion of false flags will be investigated by the Inspector General. False flags will be considered an act of levying war against the people of Chung-o-guk. So there's a few underlying principles that I wanted to extract that make because they're relevant for future slides, and basically that the office of Inspector General is under the authority of the king. And also the second principle is that the office of Inspector General will carry out the functions of investigating and bringing prosecutions. So this is obviously on a more macro level, but on a micro, if this is a principle, it's certainly applicable. Another principle is that Kuk-jin has been given the role of Inspector General. On principle, then he would be responsible for carrying out the investigations. So the principles in the second clause is basically that public servants cannot use their role and carry out clandestine acts with the intent to mold public opinion. But if they do, any suspicions of false flags, accusations will be investigated by the Inspector General. Now that's a very strong principle. It's a will be investigated by the Inspector General. So it doesn't look like he has any choice here. Constitutional uncertainty. So based solely on the facts of the case and the principles thought to be embedded into the Constitution, I did have some, things that became a little bit notable. So, for instance, the case was filed to the Office of Inspector General, or at least the first case was. But the Inspector General actually dismisses what, on principle, was his constitutional responsibility. For instance, the judge wrote at one point that Inspector General has been informed and has spoken to have the king appoint a judge to preside over the hearing. Now, this is strange because it's actually the king that has direct authority over the Inspector General. Not only that, but the Inspector General himself is responsible for the investigation on principle, not to have the king appoint a judge. Another thing that was a little uncertain was that the case included accusations of a false flag. Now, if you recall the last slide, on principle, false flag accusations will be investigated. So the Constitution mandates the Inspector General directly to investigate false flag accusations. However, no investigation ever actually occurred into the accused crimes. And then the last point was the case became quasi-constitutional. So related to the first point, where initially the case was with the Court of Grievances with the Office of Inspector General. However, it was transferred from that Court of Grievances to a standard court with an appointed judge by the king. So where did those underlying principles come from to actually change from what on principle was the Inspector General's responsibility, but instead deferred to a standard court case? This came out where the Office of Inspector General was switched to the voluntary court of Chung-o-guk, if you read the actual documentation. So it was almost like this was a kangaroo court of public perception rather than a kind of an honest dispute of the underlying principles of a court case. So there were some points to ponder. Why did the Inspector General not honor the inherent constitutional principles? Why did the king not direct Cain to fulfill his constitutional responsibility? Why have Cain as Inspector General if he does not honor the role? Does the role of Inspector General represent a public official or an archangel? And then aren't all public officials supposed to be accountable to the citizen kings? And then what recourse can citizens have for a negligent Inspector General? So it's just food for thought and points to ponder.